on this Sunday morning, a special Sunday morning, the 27th of September, 2020, because it was on this date in 19 that um, the one, the only, Alan Kasper appeared on this earth. And I just want to, Alan and I have been very close friends for many, many years now, going on 40 years. The first TV job I worked for was in the weather office at WCBS with him, and he is because he's still with us. He is a snow lover, and I think, Joe, that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of weather folks in our age group gravitated to him so much and identified with him on the air, because I think from a weather standpoint, he was unashamedly a snow lover and said so on the air many times. And
Absolutely.
I think that immediately just like forged the knot between most of the weather, the young folks that wanted to do what he was doing for a living, and it kind of forged a bond there.
It is absolutely true. He was the best. There were the other weather forecasters who were on the air at the time. Dr. Frank Field, the man who, next to Walter Cronkite, was judged to be the second most trusted man in broadcasting. Frank Field didn't do anything more than just simply go upstairs or downstairs. I didn't know exactly where the end of the studios
Downstairs,
were. Downstairs
downstairs.
to the National Weather Service office at 30 Rock, and he would just get a briefing from the folks, the meteorologists down there, come back upstairs and repeat what they had told him.
Right.
Tex Antoine was also kind of a rip and reader. He ripped off the forecast from the teletype. Alan, on the other hand, was not like that. Alan looked at everything. I remember one particular storm, whereas the other guys were saying, chance of rain. He made it, he didn't say, don't watch the other guys because they don't know what they're talking about. He looked straight into the camera and he would say, guidance, weather guidance, at least that I've looked at, suggests that.
Right.
And that was Alan Kasper. And Alan was the perfect foil for all that. I mean, you talk about a foil. He and Jim Jensen used to get into some legendary conversations, especially the one time when, and you remember this, when Jensen was commenting about the fact he had a charity softball team, and Alan said, "Boy, it was like in March." He said it was so mild out there today. It's too bad you didn't play softball. And Jensen said, "Well, we had a game today." And Alan said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Do you find that it's getting more and more difficult, Jim, to play out there as you're getting older?"
Yeah, I remember that. It's funny the certain things you do remember. Yeah, and I have to say, over the years, at least from the standpoint of his approach of doing weather on air, I sort of, I kind of went down the same road with the fact of in terms of the content. I never was really afraid of getting technical on the air. And so you saw it over the years, especially
Oh
when I
yeah.
was at PIX. Look, this is what it is. You know, if you watch, as I tell folks who watch these live streams and have over time, and that have messaged me and saying, I really, I'm trying to understand how weather goes, is going on. And I said, listen, if you watch and listen long enough, every so often you're going to have light bulbs are going to go off in your head saying, "Oh, I get this. I got it now."
Right.
And that's what you do. And I threw it all out there, and that's what he did, and did it on 1015 in New Jersey, where he spent almost 20, I think it was 20 years, I
And
guess.
I unabashedly stole from Alan Casper. I mean, most other forecasters, they would say variable cloudiness. What does that mean? Alan changed that to varying amounts of cloud and sun,
Right.
or intervals of cloud and sun.
Or a
A
mix
lot
of
more
sun and
involved
clouds,
with the
which
variable
is
cloudiness.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
He introduced into the lexicon warm air advection. I
mhm.
know the little old lady sitting in front of her TV set, 70 years old, probably said, "What does that mean? Warm air? I just
Well,
want to know."
I understand though it's a hot subject matter around the bridge table every week.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
cold air advection, warm air advection could
yeah.
be could be describing the states of their relationships. I don't know.
But he was great, and yeah, he kind of drew. He not only drew me in and drew you in, but he also drew others. Nick Gregory, for example, on Channel 5, Fox 5,
Yes.
uh, was drawn into this profession in part by watching Alan Kasper growing up. We owe so much to Alan, and many happy returns. If you're watching, Alan, it is great to still have you out there. And it would be great, though, if somehow a radio station, I don't even bother saying television because television doesn't like anybody over
I,
55.
well, yeah, exactly.
Uh,
I think he's perfectly happy in his retirement playing golf, and I called him this morning, but he was out. I'm thinking he went out for his daily walk and maybe went out for breakfast on his birthday Sunday. So we wish him all the best.
great.
And now, next up, let's. I just want to say, by the way, welcome to all our podcast listeners, as they seem to be growing by, let's
Leaps
call it,
and bounds.
well, yeah, I mean, we're taking some strides in there. So happy to have you aboard. And remember, folks, this show and Weather in 5 are available as podcasts. So if you can't watch the video, you can always just plug in your earbuds and listen to the show. And you can find it under Joe and Joe Weather Show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and on and on. Wherever you go to your podcast home, we're in there somewhere. The Joe and Joe Weather Show on Apple, Google, Spotify, etc. Okay, so weather-wise, Mr. Rayo, pattern change this week. We go from
Yes,
uh, we go from the dry what's it 16 days now we haven't seen a
yes, the
drop of rain.
16.
It's yeah, 16, some places maybe a little bit more.
Central Park in the last 16 days, a trace of precipitation. They had 1.2 inches of rain on September 10th. Lingering, some of that lingered or spilled over into September 11th as maybe a bit of drizzle or a brief shower. That was a trace on September 11th, and ever since, bone dry up until today. Although right now, I notice my wife is on the chat board. Right now, out here in Putnam Valley, a very, very light mist falling, intermittent mist. Maybe you could call it L minus minus here
Yeah. Well,
in the
we
valley.
just actually had the sun come out here, so we broke out a little while ago. Then some clouds have reformed again, but this happened yesterday, and then by 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it went wide open. I did bring up. I pulled it down yesterday. The drought monitor for the Northeast. So this is valid through yesterday, and there is extreme drought in parts of northeast and easternmost Connecticut, all of Rhode Island, and a small portion of southeast Massachusetts, where it's not extreme drought. We're talking severe drought that extends up through New Hampshire and Maine. There's even some pockets of extreme drought in southwestern Maine and also up in northeastern Maine or northwestern Maine.
Before you continue, on the chat board, Bill Rogers just is asking, what is L minus minus? L is, if you're looking at the teletype reports, L stands for drizzle. An L minus would mean light drizzle. L minus minus would mean the lightest
Light drizzle.
light drizzle or
Right.
mist or something. So that's what L minus minus means, Bill. And back to you, Joe.
Well, what this area needs is more than just L minus minus or just L minus. It needs R plus and maybe R plus plus. So that would be heavy rain and a soaking heavy rain, not a heavy rain that all falls in 1 hour because it's going to run off. But if we can manage to get 2 or 3 inches of rain and spread it out over about 48 hours, that would really go a long way in some areas to at least uh, dent the very dry conditions. And we should note, Joe, by the way, that in terms of the drought conditions, once you go south of New York City, the summer was fairly wet, and they also had remnants of tropical systems go through, including very slow moving remnants of tropical storm beta over the last several days that moved across the southeastern part of the United States. So it's really kind of a tale of two worlds here now. We went to that one point, I forgot when it was, maybe back in the early spring, where there was no drought condition anywhere in the United States. And now went to the other extreme where the western part of the U.S. is under either extreme drought or severe drought, and even a few places exceptional drought. the Northeast is the Northeast, north and east of New York City in general is under very dry or drought conditions, but everybody else is pretty much sitting near normal. So we get a good soaking rain Tuesday, later Tuesday into Wednesday night. I think we go a long way to making a dent in the dry conditions in the Northeast.
It's kind of amazing to me that Maine was right on the precipice, at least part of Maine, down east Maine, was right on the precipice of breaking their drought situation because of Teddy. Teddy came so very close to dropping some much needed rain, but it kind of just like skimmed away just off to the east, gave most of its rainfall to Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland, and left Maine still out in the drought, so to speak.
Yes, the rain in Maine. Does it fall
Didn't
on?
fall mainly on the plain this
No, it
time.
doesn't.
No.
All right, so let's take a look at what's going on satellite wise. By the way, um, even before we do that, let me just come back full screen for 1 second, and then we'll go to the satellite. I just want to just make a couple of mentions on this wonderful Sunday morning that Steve Lapointe and Paul Roman hitting super chat this morning. Joe and I appreciate it greatly, the support greatly. And those of you who are interested, I just want to make a quick mention that you can support also through my weather platform on Patreon. That's patreon.com/meteorologist Joe Chaffee. It's on a descriptor to this live stream or podcast, whichever way you're watching it. The link is. And if you subscribe for a full year at if you take the $2 a month tier, if you subscribe, or any of the tiers, if you subscribe for a full year, you get a 15% discount or 2 months free. And that also applies to current members. So if you're a current member, you just need to go in and change your settings if you choose to do it that way. Okay, so I did my little shameless self-promotion for the day, and now we can go back to the U.S. satellite loop.
And one before you go to the satellite loop, Gary Brown on the chat board says, Joe Rayo, I know this is history, but when Teddy cruised by here, I believe the tides and coastal flooding were low because we were under the effect of a new moon. Now, everybody, whenever there's a new moon, and especially when the new moon is abnormally close, and we're going to have just such a scenario in October, a new moon coinciding with perigee, the moon's closest point in its orbit to the Earth, then you get exceptionally large astronomical tides. Everybody talks about higher than normal tides. The tides are going to be much higher, coastal flooding. But what they fail to tell all of you is that during these periods, when the moon is at new phase with the Earth and the sun, and we're in that alignment called syzygy, it's not so much that the tides are higher, but the tides are also much lower. There is a greater range, if you
Yes.
will, between high tide and low tide. So you can have very high tides, but if you're out there during the time of low tide, during one of these periods, you will see that the tide is exceptionally low, very low, in fact. So, Gary, when you were looking out at the tides, you may very well have been looking at a low tide. And if you were, it was probably lower than normal, again, because of the fact that we had a greater tidal range. It's not only because when the moon is very close, the tides are very, very high, but also, ironically enough, 6 hours later, they also get very, very low, again, for the very same reason. Okay.
All right. Okay. So, by the way, I'm sorry. What was the date on that again?
The date on what?
With regards to the next high tide phase that we're going into,
Oh,
that would be
well, we have a full moon. We have two full moons in October.
right. This is
October
one.
1st and the 31st, Halloween. We're gonna have a blue moon because it's the second full
Right.
moon
All right.
in
So
October.
October 1st being this coming, was it Thursday?
Right.
Okay.
But the thing about the new, you see, when you have an exceptionally close new moon, then half an orbit before or after the moon is at its furthest point, apogee point. So in October, twice we're going to have exceptionally far full moons. And in fact, the full moon on Halloween will be at that point in the moon's orbit, farthest from the Earth. And you say to yourself, well, we call a full moon when it's close to the Earth the supermoon. What do you call a moon when it's farthest from the Earth?
The
The
not
uh,
so super moon.
the term no, the term for that is micro moon.
Oh, all right.
So we're going to have on October 31st, Joe, and it's also the Hunter's full moon. The October 1st moon is the
A lot of
hardest moon
people,
because
a lot of people laying claim to this particular moon this month, Joe. You've got the hunters, the blues,
right. Well, the one at the end of October, October 31st, will be called the Halloween Hunters Blue Micro Moon. But October 15th is when the moon is going to be at new phase, when it's closest to the Earth. And if we have a big storm, a big coastal storm, anywhere within a few days of that date, watch for the possibility, especially right along the ocean shore, of much higher than normal tides. When the moon is coinciding with perigee, either at a full phase or a new phase, the mathematical algorithm, I think you have to cube something or whatever, and I don't off the top of my head know it here, but um, it means that the tides run 30 to 40% higher than your normal astronomically high phase of the moon. So
Gotcha.
that'll be a time to watch. We'll be in mid-October, and Lord only knows what would happen if we had some kind of a hurricane to deal with
Well,
right around that
we
time.
can, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later. I do expect this sort of break period that we're in now in the tropics is going to come to an end, and I think we're going to wind up seeing things rev up, and maybe starting about a week, maybe next weekend, we might start to see something try and come out. And I think the western part of the Caribbean. I talked about this yesterday on a Patreon post. That the western part of the Caribbean, I think, is where we're going to see something, and we'll explain why in a second. But Joe, looking at the satellite, the full loop of the U.S. And one thing that seems to be, first of all, the smoke condition seems to be a lot better than it was about, say, a week or 10 days ago. It looks like
Right.
these moving weather systems have at least either distributed all the smoke around and made the layers thinner, or in some cases gotten rid of them completely, which is good. We're in this mode which is typical of the beginning of fall, where you have the leftover warm air of the summertime. When it hangs around, you get these morning clouds, even some spotty drizzle, as you pointed out by you, and then you break out into some sun. But there's energy, and you start to see these clouds that are coming down from central Canada into the northern plains. So that's going to be the next trough. And this trough is different from the others because this is going to drop into the east. It's going to hang for a while. So I think it does set us up for some that's a soaking rain for us, which we talked about in the when we had the drought map up.
Right, right. And as you just said, we could use a soaking rain as opposed to the sudden downpour or downpour in which would just roll off or run off the ground. And we've had, as we mentioned near the top of the show, Joe, 16 straight days of bone dry or almost bone dry weather. So we could use any kind of pattern change that we can get our hands on. It looks like it finally is coming our way this week.
The places from southern Virginia down to Georgia, dealing with the remnants of beta that went on through, and that took about 3 days to cross. But all of that wound up being passing by to our south. Although I did notice yesterday morning there were a couple of heavier showers that kind of nosed up into parts of Delaware and southeastern Pennsylvania, and there were a few little uh, scattered sprinkles and showers around. But for the vast majority of folks, it was dry. Look at the Canadian satellite. I'm going to make it a point, by the way, to use this more going forward, because I think it gives everybody a better understanding of how much Canada impacts our weather, because it in the fall and winter time, particularly in the wintertime, it's a huge player. And you can actually see the upper low. If you take a look in the middle of the loop, Joe, there's the rotation around this upper low, and here's your trough that's beginning to drop southward. And this trough is going to be dropping into the eastern part of the United States, creating a rather strong southerly flow aloft. And thankfully, we have no tropical storm off the southeast coast or in the Bahamas right now, because I
Right,
think we would be in serious trouble along the eastern seaboard with the way this trough is shaping up. But the good news is that it is going to be pulling up tropical moisture, and then starting on Tuesday, and then maybe lasting at least through Wednesday, possibly even in through Wednesday night, that we'll get this rain. And also, I just want to point out, we do also have another round of significant moisture moving up into the Canadian Northwest. Some of that's going to bleed down into the Pacific Northwest, but we still don't have um, rain coming into California and into the southwestern part of the United States.
right, right. So,
Check.
I guess we could be thankful for the most part that we don't have anything potentially adverse in the sense that something that might be capable of doing significant damage. Um, but we're in a quiet period now, so we might as well just enjoy it while it lasts.
Correct. Radar's quiet up and down the East Coast until you get to the Florida Panhandle, where we've got a little bit of shower and thunderstorm activity going on there. You can see it here if I go close up. And also seeing a bit of rain moving into the western lakes, the upper Mississippi Valley, sweeping out of the central and northern plains. And you notice there's kind of a circular arc to the echoes in North Dakota, so that's one of the short waves that's coming down. And in the west, for now, things are quiet up in Washington State with a few light showers offshore, and things are mostly quiet up in California. Take a look, Joe, at what WPC did for rainfall, because for the next 7 days, and this really, when you see the upper air, this will totally make sense because you have, while we have this trough in the eastern part of the United States, okay, there's going to be a big ridge in the western part of the United States. So as a result, if you are in general from just west of the Mississippi River eastward, you've got chances for rain. If you're in the coastal plain, Joe, look, they're going for a large area of 3+ inches over the next 7 days from coastal Georgia all the way up into northern Maine. But all of the west is bone dry. The western half of the United States is completely bone dry.
Yes, and again, much needed rainfall. I mean, nature has a way of balancing the books, so to speak. And so now we've had a long stretch, 2+ weeks of dry weather. I'm just concerned that in this particular case, we may be seeing a lot of that rainfall that we should have been getting, not over the next 2 weeks, but unfortunately squeezed into a much smaller time frame, which could lead to some flooding concerns, and also, of course, if it comes down too hard, too fast, it could do more bad than good. But
yeah, in fact,
at least it's a change from the conditions we've had over the last couple of weeks.
In fact, you mentioned that. Let's see where they have it here. Hang on. So let's start with today. This is just like SPC does with the with the thunderstorms. The Weather Prediction Center does it with flash flooding. So they've got a marginal risk of some flash flooding in parts of Florida today, western Florida, the Panhandle, and a small area in northwest Arkansas. But as we move into day 2 and day 3, the action starts to shift into the east, where we've got marginal risk from Georgia, South Carolina, and also in the southern Appalachians. But day 3 is for Tuesday. This is where it gets a bit busy. And they actually have a slight risk of flash flooding, Joe, from South Carolina northward all the way up through eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, through upstate New York, and into western Vermont. I suspect that we might wind, if it looks as if we're going to get into several rounds of heavy rains with this rather vigorous looking shortwave trough that's going to be lifting up from the south, from the south, the Gulf states, and lifts northward up Tuesday night into Wednesday night. And we might, I'm thinking we might actually see tomorrow. They may stick in a little patch of moderate in here if it looks like we're really going to see some 3-inch plus rainfalls.
Yeah, and it's going to be yeah, you're absolutely right. I think moderate, if this pattern does take hold. See, the problem is not the same system that we've been talking about for the last week or so that is precluding any widespread tropical outbreak, tropical cyclone outbreak, that huge subtropical high out smack in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, flexing its muscles. So now what we're having is that in this fast flow, we have these fronts that are coming across the country and literally ramming into to the western side of that subtropical high, slowing it down or even causing it to halt for a while,
right,
and allowing for little ripples or waves of low pressure to move up along it. And that is the key to what is going to eventually cause our spell of wet weather here. It can be directly traced to what we would normally call or nominally would call a fair weather system. It just the fair weather system is in the wrong spot,
Right.
and we're going to have to pay the price now for that.
And by the way, through all of this also is the fact that SPC actually has a marginal risk of severe weather from eastern half of South Carolina, much of North Carolina, and a good chunk of the state of Virginia up to the southern part of the Delmarva Peninsula, which kind of makes sense here. I mean, you're going to have all this tropical air, dew points that are going to be up there into the mid 60s, mid to high 60s in some places. Temperatures I think are going to probably be more in the 70s through all of this because it's the end of September and this is not a setup like you would have say in late July or early August. But nonetheless, and these might be thunderstorms that I think will probably add to the rain issue more than anything else. So from the standpoint of the upper air, one of the things I did notice, well, there's two things here that I think that stand out to me, Joe. One is for the first time in quite a while, we seem to be going from an upper air, which is, if you look at where we're starting from, and I rolled it back to Saturday. This has been kind of the signature pattern for quite a while, where we've had this, sort of narrow upper high on the Pacific side, very flat looking, this strong jet in the northern Pacific coming into the northwest and western Canada. In the Atlantic, you've sort of had the same thing with this sort of narrow ridge and then the strong jet that's out in the Atlantic. And we've been getting these weak weather systems that have been coming through with these cold fronts. And of course, we got graced with that beautiful dry air mass back early last week. But now it's different. You're getting amplitude for the first time since back in August. We're going back to what we saw in late July into mid-August, which were these anomalous upper troughs that you don't see that in that time of year. You usually start to see them in this time of year. But even for this time of year, this is a pretty amplified looking pattern. And of course, if this were wintertime, I think there would be a lot of folks that the snow lovers would be salivating at some point out of this. But this is a much better pattern for wet weather here than what we've
Right,
had.
right, absolutely. In fact, somebody on the chat board here making an allusion to that. I'm just trying to see. Oh yeah, Jason Schaefer saying, "I think so. That trough is going to make the eastern U.S. its home."
Yeah.
Well, we'll see how long it sticks around. Generally speaking, now, when a system like this drops in and takes hold, they stick around for maybe about 4 to 6 weeks, and then they say, "Well, it's time for me to move on." It's rare that they stay for, let's say, an entire half a year or an entire season, so to speak. But we'll see. We'll
Yeah,
see how this goes.
sometimes when a pattern gets really stubborn, you kind of lock in for 6 to 8 weeks, and then you get a break, and then maybe it goes back to it for about 3 or 4 weeks. That depends. But here's the big driver. This really intense looking low that's sitting in the eastern Aleutian / Gulf of Alaska with troughing down to Hawaii. Anytime you see, folks, you see a trough along 160 degrees west. If you see a deep trough there, the atmosphere's got to, if you kind of, I guess the way to sort of envision it is if you, I guess if you take a rope and you kind of make a loop in one spot, it'll drop further down in another spot, that sort of idea. And that's what the atmosphere is doing. So if some place is going to see amplitude because of a really intense system, there has to be a corresponding big ridge or upper high, and you have that building in the west. And as a result, here's your next deep trough. That is as a result of that big ridge in the west, you've got a deep trough in the east. And this is the part to pay attention to for the East Coast is this vigorous, the southern part of this trough is very vigorous. There's an upper low there, and that's going to lift up the eastern seaboard in some fashion, and that's what's going to probably generate some of that heavy rain that we're going to be dealing with. And the other thing, Joe, I would point out too, with this deep trough or lower pressures running down into the Gulf of Mexico in the Northeast Gulf, it is going to create lower than normal pressures in the Western Caribbean in the longer term. And I think this is the zone, but in this zone in here is where I think Not this area, in the Eastern Caribbean, but the Western Caribbean. I think this is where we're going to see something try to develop in terms of the tropics. Maybe we'll start to see some hints of it late this week or going into next weekend, but that's the area. And if you watch, by the way, if we run the loop here, you'll see that the trough axis doesn't lift up, Joe. There's actually a blocking high. If you look up in Greenland, there's a block that's coming in over the top from Scandinavia into
Right.
Greenland. So that's going to hold the trough in place for a while.
Right. And that's akin to what I just mentioned a few minutes ago, that big subtropical high pressure system over the Atlantic Ocean, and some building pressures to the north of the center, up toward Greenland, the upper atmosphere. And so that all is going to, loan itself to creating a rather tempestuous weather pattern along the Atlantic seaboard, and maybe, as you just mentioned, as far south or as far down into the Western Caribbean.
I just pulled up on random, by the way, and totally at random, it jumped to the 294-hour GFS for Friday, October 9th, which has some snow in northern Maine. Okay?
There you go.
So the eye candy will be starting to appear at a regular basis, snow lovers. Just bear that in mind.
Right.
And also bear that in mind that the eye candy seldom gets tasted. Okay, this time of year. But all right, so until we get to Tuesday, we start to see the impacts of the trough tonight and Monday with showers from Chicago down through central Arkansas and northeast Texas, and then that shifts around tomorrow into the Ohio Valley. You've got a low sitting somewhere near Akron, I guess, and that goes over to Eastern Lake Huron Monday evening. So at least through tomorrow, Joe, I'm thinking that other than that there might be a scattered pop-up someplace, this isn't we're out of what I would call summer thunderstorm season now. So this is where you just get a downpour and that's it. You don't really get one that's accompanied by lightning and thunder and 10 inches of rain in 27 minutes and whole towns float away. And that's not going to happen this time of year. So I think other than a pop-up, we're not going to see much of anything here. That's where our front is. And because the trough is kind of oriented the way it is north-south, the front only gets so far east because of the southerly winds aloft, and we seem to be in a good spot here. Did you agree with the timing of the GFS with these waves of rain? It looks like there's a wave of rain that comes up the coast during Tuesday morning, and then another one Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, and a third one Wednesday night into early Thursday morning.
Well, I mean, they have projected a stationary or quasi-stationary front all the way from northern Maine right down just inland of the Atlantic seaboard to central Florida. And I say quasi because it's kind of wavering back and forth, and each wave is it's its own separate zone of low pressure. So maybe you got one over New York State, maybe you got another one later in the day on Wednesday coming up from North Carolina. So yeah, it's going to be a matter now of timing out these little surges, these little waves of rain from later Tuesday on into midweek, because again, that front it can't go anywhere with that big blocking offshore high pressure
Right.
system. So that we're going to be stuck in this pattern for a while.
And it's after the last wave, Wednesday night into early Thursday morning, that we finally break that pattern. That seems to be strong enough where the upper trough just kind of pushes the frontal boundary, gets pushed a little bit further offshore, and we start to see some improvement and the weather calms down a bit. Yes, folks, that's next Friday afternoon. That's light snow showing up in northwest Wisconsin. Again, this is the season for eye candy to show up. And you'll start to see, by the way, as we go forward on the long range, because of the fact that you still have all this troughing in the east, you're going to see weather systems moving along with threats for showers on the models. Now, they're going to vary from day to day, but the bottom line is with the trough in the east and the ridge in the west, it is going to make for a more active pattern. Now, I want to give you just a real close-up view of the tropics, and we'll take a look at that. And okay, so again, the pressures are going to be low. If you take a look, if you use on tropicaltidbits.com, Levi Cowan's wonderful site, and I had a short conversation with him yesterday, Joe, trying to get him to come on this program. I'm hoping for a response. Uh,
Sometimes,
Levi, if you're listening, we love you. Come on the show because everybody loves your site and you can explain how you do all this.
but Joe, sometimes it's like Batman or Superman. They prefer to remain undercover, so to speak.
I know, but that I just
They
don't.
don't want to come out. They don't want to come
I
out
just
with
find that
that.
utterly unacceptable. We're such a loving program. But yeah, take a look at here from the standpoint of this is the surface map with the anomalies. In other words, where you see the blue is where pressures are lower than normal, and where you see the brown and orange or brown or reddish colors, that's where pressures at the surface are higher than normal. And you clearly see all the blue or the bluish areas kind of congregate there in the Western Caribbean. And that's because of the way the trough is. And I think, again, this is where I think you're going to see something form. And, in terms of the specifics of what the models do from run to run, if you've been following this over the last several days, we've had a couple of them shoot it up into the Western Florida, take it up the East Coast. You've had a couple of them that didn't really do much of anything at all with it. You've had a couple of them. Now, this one in particular swings it northeast and east. It takes it over South Florida. Don't pay attention to that. Okay, that's not important. What's important right now is seeing where the genesis area is going to be, and I think it is going to be in the Northwest West Caribbean. And by the way, Joe, I don't know if you noticed this, but if you look on the satellite loop, I mean they even mentioned it, but the remnants of Paulette are
They're calling it the zombie storm,
it
Joe.
just won't go away. I mean, if you look closely, it's on the upper right. There's a little low cloud. There's a little swirl there with a tiny bit of convection south of the Azores. It's still there. It will not go away. But the Hurricane Center says it's not going to develop into anything on the last outlook. So hopefully it will be. Because can you imagine if this regenerates for a second time? Because it's already regenerated once into a tropical system. If it regenerates a second time, I don't think that happens very often, where it goes and dies and then gets reborn and then dies again and then gets reborn. But nonetheless, the rest of the tropics, you can see, folks, are still very quiet, which even in the most active of seasons, this should not be a shocker because that is the atmosphere has to recharge. That's just pretty much how it goes. It has to recharge. Uh, it can't just be spewing out these massive rounds of energy on a nonstop basis.
Right.
Uh,
And
it,
so
it,
you could also draw the analogy to a baseball player who gets into a run, let's say a week or 10-day run where he's hitting home runs, doubles, triples, and everything. And you say to yourself, you extrapolate, you say, my God, if this guy continues, he's going to have 150 home runs at the end of the season. Of course, he's not going to have 150 home runs. He needs, as you just said, in terms of the tropics, to recharge, to slow down. There'll be a lull, for a while where nothing is going to happen. I think that's the same thing here. The main purpose of tropical cyclones, and they actually do the earth good. It's a way of letting off steam, so to speak, for the planet. It's a way to get rid of all of that surplus heat that has built up in the tropics during the early and middle
right.
part of the summer. And that's what hurricanes and tropical storms are. They let off heat. So after this long bevy of day after day after day of tropical cyclones seemingly popping up every which way, now enough surplus heat has been let go. Now it's time for the Earth to kind of calm down for a little bit. And now, when we get another surplus, and that probably will happen sometime in October, we'll see maybe for the final time a renewal of all of this activity once again.
Right, and rarely is that heat distributed evenly because this year we have the very busy Atlantic, uh, while at the same time we have the very quiet Eastern Pacific in terms of tropical cyclone activity. I haven't really looked at what the numbers are in the Western Pacific, which usually it is relatively busy there all the time or almost all the time. But yeah, and this is due to the La Nina condition on the Pacific side with the cooler than normal Pacific Ocean water temperatures. Uh, so the Atlantic's been with the La Nina present and probably strengthening a little bit. It's hard for me to imagine that the hurricane season is going to shut down
No,
right now. I think we're going to see. I think we could wind up seeing 5 or 6 more named storms between now and
now
the
what
end
was
of the year.
the last storm on the 2005 list was Zeta, I believe.
Correct.
So we
And that
have,
happened on December 29th, 30th,
yeah,
and carried over into January of the next year in
crazy.
2016. Yeah, so I wouldn't be shocked if we wind up passing through all of this. I
And
still,
somebody actually said to me, well, why don't they retire a Greek alphabet letter or whatever like that?
there haven't
And
been many, there haven't been hardly any Greek. Well,
but,
in the early 50s, they used the Greek alphabet for a few years before they went to the all female names,
yeah,
like
I understand
1950,
that.
but none of those storms got retired.
Right. Now, the thing is, if we had a noteworthy storm in the Greek
They
alphabet,
retired
they're not going to retire it, but they'll simply say, for example, they'll say Gamma 2020. So we know it was the Gamma
right.
storm, we know the year. That's easy enough.
Yeah,
It's
they could do that. I mean, this is only the second time since they began tracking these things and that they've been giving name designations to it. That we've gone to the Greek alphabet. So, how many times is that going to happen? In reality, how many? We think if everything eventually reverts to the mean, which is 12, um, these adventures into uh, wiping out the whole list should be few and far between. So
latex,
I'm not too concerned. It's not on
latex
the
stream.
it's not on my priority list to worry about what the Hurricane Center is going to do if they retire a letter of the Greek alphabet.
Latex streams on the chat board is equating you with Captain Kirk.
Me? What did I
Oh,
say? Yeah,
I don't know.
somebody said I said made a Star Trek reference. I wasn't
Uh,
even, or is that
yeah,
you?
no, I never heard that Joe use that term before. Reminds me of Star Trek. And Latex Stream says Chiaffi Kirk / Kirk. And then somebody, then Latex Stream come back to
Oh,
Rayo.
I said Genesis. Oh, that is a Star Trek 2 reference. Yes,
Yeah,
okay.
and
Believe,
Latex Stream says Rayo can't be Spock. I don't. I agree with you. I don't think I could be
what do you want
Spock.
to be? Bones?
Maybe I could be Bones.
Bones?
I'm a
No,
meteorologist.
no.
Damn it.
I'll tell you something. If I had, to, I'm not a huge. I've watched Star Trek. I'm not a. I wouldn't call me a Trekkie.
Okay.
I'm not a Trekkie. But
I
if
went.
you ask me if there's one character that I would want to be on on Star Trek, which character would be? It would be Chekhov.
It was Mr.
Yeah,
Chekhov.
because he got to drive that thing.
I don't know.
I'd
I'd
like
like
to
to
be
be,
Mr. Chekhov. Mr.
or maybe
Chekhov
Mr.
was always, he was focused. He did what he had to do, and it's kind of like where my head's at. I'm a Chekhov guy.
Mr. Spock, or no, Mr. Scotty.
By the way, if you want to see an interesting show, I wish you could see this. As I know you don't have Netflix, it's like being that you're into astronomy and everything. I mean that is such a very much a part of who you are. I've been watching on Netflix a new series that actually started back a couple of weeks ago, and I only got one episode left called Away. And it's about an international manned mission to land on Mars to be the first human beings to land on the planet Mars, and the sort of the things that they go through on the space capsule, on the spaceship that they're on, and um, uh, you know, naturally drama happens along the way, and the people in the mission, it's a 3-year mission. So they focus on also the fact that they're leaving their families for 3 years,
Right.
leaving their children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I would just be interested in your opinion in terms of the space stuff that they did. The special effects I think are very good, um, but there's a lot of space stuff with regards to the launches and the you know
Yeah, but
all
unfortunately,
that stuff.
television and motion pictures take a good deal of artistic license and a lot of. I'll
No,
give
and
you.
I get that. But I'm curious as to that's exactly what I would be interested in from you is how much of that is artistic license and how much of that is, um, I mean, it's obviously based in some fact, but I guess my question, my point is, did they do a good job giving you an idea of what it might be
I've
like?
never seen the program though, but if I do get a chance, I'll take a look at it and I'll give you my report.
Okay,
Report.
but it's called
By,
Away.
By the way, in a little over a week, October the 6th, the planet Mars is going to come as close to the Earth as it will come for the next 15 years. In fact, if we had an astronaut on Mars and radioed a message back to the Earth on October 6th, it would take 3 minutes and 26 seconds for that signal to reach the Earth because Mars will be 38 million miles or so away from the Earth. And at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, it would take a bit over 3 minutes for that radio wave to reach us. So,
All right.
and you will not be able. You can't miss Mars because now it is just absolutely so bright. In fact, October 2nd. What is that? That's Friday night. Is that Friday night of this upcoming week?
Yes, it
October
is.
2nd.
Mm-hmm.
Friday night it's going to be right near the almost full moon. So everybody go out and take a look and see if it's clear. If we can get this direct that's moving through the next few days with clouds and rain out of here by the end of the week to now allow for clearing skies and cooler conditions. Everybody go and look for Mars. In fact, I'll designate this right now. October 2nd, I'm calling it M&M night, Mars and Moon night. We had one of these in September. We're going to have another one in October. And the only difference is that in October, Mars is going to be even closer than it was in September. You can't miss it. Stands out like a sore thumb. This brilliant yellow-orange spot of light in the sky. It doesn't often get that way, but now it's unusually close. And go out and take a look next time it's clear.
Well, it's odd that you should mention M&Ms because that's actually part of our Briller Jeopardy, which is back today. So let's give you a Scott Briller update. As you know, he was sick and has been sick with all sorts of symptoms. He did go to get tested for COVID, and it came back negative. But now he's still just trying to kind of get rid of what it is he has, and he's going to going back to the doctor to see if they can figure this out. But he's still weak with nausea, some coughing. The cough is lessening, but he's got that. You get that sort of dazed feel when you had a fever for many days. But he was strong enough to go to Wawa to get a coffee. So that's a start, and we're waiting for you to get 100% and get back in here on a daily basis. So feel better. And here are the questions for today that he sent. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
What seasons does Uranus have?
Uranus doesn't have seasons. Uranus, unlike all the other planets, like for example, the Earth is tilted on its axis 23.5 degrees. I think Jupiter is almost straight up. Uranus is weird because Uranus is tilted on its side. It kind of rolls around on its orbit as it moves around the sun. So I really don't know. I guess, in some years, half of its orbit, the North Pole, if there is a North Pole on Uranus, is pointed toward the sun, and the other half, because again it's rolling on its side, it's pointed directly away from the sun. So I don't really know what kind of season.
So would you say it probably, well, the answer is summer and winter. So I guess that kind of makes sense with what you just said.
Yeah.
Because one side would be completely facing the sun, and then the other side wouldn't be, and then you'd go to the opposite extreme.
If you think about it, I mean,
with a very, very short transition.
It's so actually there's a period when the North Pole is facing the sun, then on the other side, the South Pole is facing the sun. So somewhere in the middle, I guess as it's rolling along, the entire
flips.
One entire side is facing the sun.
Yeah.
So I guess you could call that spring for what it's worth. But
all right,
it's a weird planet.
So our
degree tip.
So our second question is Mars related, but in a different way. What does the M&M stand for?
Well, isn't there like a Mars candy factory or
Mars Candy Corporation, which is owned by Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett. So what does M&Ms? What does that stand for?
I think the one M would be Mars. I don't know what the other M is.
The other M stands for Murray, and Murray was actually the original founder. It was a very interesting history of the finding of Mars Candy because it was founded by a man whose last name was Murray, and I think he eventually wound up selling the company to another sort of candy maker, and it got messy. I have to go and review it. I remember seeing something on the History Channel about it maybe a couple of years ago, but kind of interesting. But that's Mars Candy, so they make M&Ms. And now, how many World Series did the Yankees win with Yogi Berra?
Oh God, I think I'll say 12. Oh,
You
wait a minute,
know,
wait a minute, wait a minute. How many did they win?
yes,
How many did they win? All right. I think at one, well, I know with Casey Stengel, I know Yogi was probably on the teams. They once won five in a row. But I know there must have been like 12 pennants. I don't think there were 12 world championships. I'll say seven.
13.
13?
13.
Oh my goodness.
That's the number that
That's
that
amazing.
yeah.
And don't forget that Yogi was also a coach for the Mets, and he was on the '69 team that won the World Series. So you could
Yes.
add that to the Yankee alignment of rings that he has or had, because Yogi. I posted something the other day, John. I don't know if you saw it on my Facebook page, um, that we had a few days ago, the fifth anniversary, sadly, of Yogi's passing. But the initial AP report that went out on the wire after they announced that Yogi had passed, it said Hall of Fame Yankee catcher Yogi Bear
Oh, yeah.
has died at the age of 90.
Oh, you actually reminded me of something. I got to. I want to just before that, just want to acknowledge. Well, we had mentioned Steve Lapointe and Paul Roman hitting super chat earlier, but we can also add Chuck Cardillo, who finally got his deck stained yesterday up in the Catskills. He stained his deck, and what happens? Some of that drizzle minus became a shower when he needed 24 hours with no rain, and so he was kind of victimized by one of those isolated little patches of drizzle. And
Yep.
Jason Schaefer, who was my producer from time to time over at Channel 11 WPIX, hitting super chat today. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Paul and Steve Lapointe. And I just wanted to mention, because you're just on that note, because I happened to be doing some, I was doing some Google research, and uh, did you know that I died in July of 2015?
You did?
I did.
Oh wow.
This is one of the stranger stories of my career. I never told you this
I don't think so.
when I died.
No,
Okay,
I
so
never.
here's what happened. Now, it's a sad story. All right, it's a sad story in one respect, obviously, and I'm not trying to. I don't want anybody to tell me that I'm making fun of this. Okay, but I was laying on the couch on a Sunday afternoon. I was taking a nap, and I had just, if I remember correctly, I think I worked at Pix the night before, and at about a quarter of two, I get a phone call from the assignment desk at Channel 11. And the person on the other end, I forgot who it was, said to me, "Joe, is this you?" Um, and I said, "Yeah, it's me. Why?" And then I suddenly had this horrible feeling. And I know anybody that's worked like we have these dreams from time to time that we're supposed to be at work, but we're not. I used to always occasionally have these
Right,
recurring dreams where I'd be running down the hall because I had to be on set for my cue.
right.
And there were times in those dreams where my clothes would would melt off, and I would be totally naked, or I would never get there.
Yeah.
Well, I said, "No, I'm here." I says, "Oh my God, was I supposed to be? Am I supposed to be working today?" And he says, "No, no, no, no. I just wanted to make sure because we got something." What had happened was, and this is the odd thing. So, a man by the name of Joseph Chaffee, who coincidentally it was my age and lived 2 miles from my house. 2 miles. I have no idea who this person is. Unfortunately, took his life by jumping off a 9-story building in Lower Manhattan in Chelsea.
Uh-huh.
So I started getting, it's like I had, so I got this phone call basically telling me that and I saw the news story in the Post and on the wires, Joe Chaffee commits suicide. Okay. And of course, I call up FiOS where I was working, and the person on the assignment, I call them up and say, "Listen, I just want to let you know you're going to see stories that have about my name dying. I'm not dead." And the person on the other said, "Oh, okay, thank you. Who is this?" I work there. Okay? I am your co-employee. I work there.
You know, what would be really not funny, but they put Joe Chiaffi, commit suicide or whatever, and then somebody at the newspaper, just arbitrarily thinks, oh, it's got to be that guy I watch on Channel 11, and puts your picture in
Oh,
the
can
news.
you imagine if they did that by accident? I'd be the next Dave Vigoda.
It's true.
I mean, that whole thing where the Times had him dead, and you know what? He did a wonderful job of milking that for everything that it was
Everything
worth.
that there was
I
worth.
mean,
Or
yeah.
the time when they announced, they said Bob Hope died. Remember that?
Oh yeah, yes, that was great. His demise was exaggerated to an extent.
Right, and they even made an announcement at the in the Senate, I think, right?
I
Or
think so. Yeah.
Representatives or whatever. And like when they got back to Bob Hope said, "I'm still here."
Yeah. If you want to get anybody, just Google my name and click on the news part of Google. You'll find the news stories that were written about this poor guy. But the odd thing was, Joe, he had the same name as me, but he lived in the next town from me, literally 2 miles from
Right,
my house.
right.
And I had no idea who this person was, and no clue. So, yeah, so somebody looking at that saying, "Oh, Joe lives on Long Island, and Joe's 56 years old," and et cetera, et cetera. Uh, yeah, no, that was one of the stranger moments. You know, my career had died long before that, but that's a whole nother matter.
Well, I think
So,
it's time to put an end to another Chaffee and Rayo Sunday morning here.
yes, I
Um,
agree. It's 12 o'clock. It's 12 noon. You finished your coffee.
my
The
tea, actually, but here it is: eat,
Oh,
sleep,
very nice.
meteorology.
Very, very nice. Exact. That's very good. All right. So everybody, we'll be back tomorrow at 7 o'clock Eastern time, and be sure to tune in to Joe and Joe Weather Show either here on YouTube or you can listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, and a whole host of other places where podcasts call home. And I guess that's it. We can leave it at that, and we'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye, everybody.
Good night.